Gio, welcome back to the Jay Burden Show. How you doing, man?
Great to be here, Bubba Booey. No, I'm not doing. Not gonna bomb the show at the very beginning. Um, no, I'm doing good, man. How are you been? You're one of the most busiest podcasters. So you know,
Yeah, well, I'm really working hard to make a fake job into a real job.
yeah,
Like,
same.
obviously, podcasting isn't like an actual necessary part of society in any way, but you know
No,
what?
that's wrong. Podcasting is vital. Podcasting is the essence, the voice of the people nowadays. Even though we despise and we hate the people, but it's just no. You're right. You're right. You're right. So
But anyway, we're here to discuss something that we're actually supposed to talk about on the last episode, but then you and I got distracted and it turned into an hour-long conversation about something else.
yeah.
We're here to talk about what is in my mind a pretty interesting under-discussed film, Phantom Thread. So Gio, do you want to introduce it a little bit before we jump into the discussion?
Sure. But before you do that, let me distract you once again by saying that was a great essay you did on James Lindsay. I read it this morning, and I don't know, like it's very. You know what's funny? I think I know how James Lindsay got the idea that the woke right are Maoists. Because you have to be an old head to know this. Okay,
Okay.
he got this idea because back in the Thermidor magazine days, if you remember, I was integral part. Well, I wasn't integral part. I was one of the writers. We had the idea of like the right wing has to read like Leninism. We have to read Lenin. Okay, that's how you win a sort of like cultural revolution. And the sort of and then Carl is bad. I don't know if he's around. Apparently, he's still kicking around in a lurker all. But my good friend Carl's he also talked about this. And so I think like some wires got crossed where James Lindsay now believes that the woke right is like Maoism and Leninism. And I think this is all due to Thermidor magazine. So,
Oh, see, I think that is a much you were being much too kind to him. I think that basically it is a much lazier thing, which
oh
is
yeah, yeah.
he has defined the terms so that anyone he doesn't like is woke. And woke is inherently communist. So basically everyone I don't like is a communist. The James Lindsay Guide to Discourse. And that's basically
That's
what it
probably
is.
correct. That is probably the correct take because I'm stretching it. I'm stretching my niche online magazine that was a part of way too in terms of importance of discourse. So, but anyways, that yeah.
I
So
probably shouldn't say this, but I have not Lindsay, but another one of the sort of anti woke right crowd coming on my podcast soon,
oh
and I'm really not sure how it's gonna go because I haven't really played my hand yet, and I am
is it in the
genuinely
top
interested in
list?
this. No, this one's much dumber. I won't say who because it might
Oh,
still might
okay,
not happen.
okay, okay.
But and I was pretty upfront. I was like, hey, I want to have a conversation about the woke right. That's all I said. So I'm not entirely sure how that's gonna go. Because the more I've dug into it, and that's sort of why I wanted to do a review of one of his pieces, because I was like, all right, like I make fun of this guy enough, and I know what he says in short form, but like
Right.
let's give him the benefit of the doubt. Like let's dig into something that should have taken him a long time to come up with, right? A long
Right.
article. Like, this should be him at his best. I was not impressed, but enough about Lindsay. Because look, man, if you want to get me distracted, that is a way to get me distracted.
Yeah. If you talk hockey or pro wrestling with me, so anyways,
yeah. So we're here to talk about the
Phantom
2017 film by Paul Thomas Anderson, Phantom Thread. So I'll be honest, I was not super excited initially. Like I did not think this is a movie that I would like because it's a movie about a fashion designer. Like that sounds pretty dumb, if I'm going to be brutally honest, but it's really fascinating. So effectively, just in broad strokes, this movie is sort of a drama concerning the relationship between fashion designer Reynolds Woodcock, Cyril, his sister, and then Alma, sort of the main character, a woman who he ends up falling in love with. Uh, Broad strokes, this movie has a very fascinating discussion about the relationship between genius and a muse, and then also the kind of different ways in which femininity encounters and sort of breaks down masculine genius. I think there are
Yes.
multiple ways to look at it, none of which I think were exactly what the director was necessarily desiring to come to express. And then maybe we can get into this later, Gio, but I think there's a fascinating sort of like alternate reading as well, which
Yeah.
is definitely not what the book or the movie is trying to talk about, but is worth discussing maybe later.
Well, I think that you said about the sort of female energy hobbling in a weird way, the genius of the masculine. I can see it somewhat, but I see more of a reciprocal relationship there. I know we're getting ahead, but we'll explain. I think that
Yeah.
me being like a Lansharkian male feminist on the right, I think that there is a powerful phonic relationship there that is destructive. I will grant you it is destructive, but it's also sustaining but we can haggle over the ending of the film. So spoiler alerts, we're going to get into a lot of spoiler alerts. But
Oh yeah.
I didn't think to add Jay before I do my bit. So
Oh, not at all. So in sort of the beginning of the movie, we're introduced to Reynolds. His sister is his business partner at this extremely successful fashion house that provides dresses to the rich and famous.
yeah, and this is an
The
actual
sister,
house, by the way. It's like this is the old school style of fashion design. Yeah.
right? And we see him, in the initial kind of start of the movie, with a woman who's sort of his muse, and he's sick and tired of her. He basically, ends the relationship, and so to clear his head, after this traumatic, breakup, and we see him throughout it being very much disturbed by, social conflict. Right? He cannot create under these circumstances, so he goes to the country, and in a diner, he meets this girl, Alma. He sort of falls in love with her. Although what's interesting is that it seems that he falls in love with her more as a muse than as a romantic partner.
Yeah.
Their relationship kind of, burgeons. There's, ultimately their relationship falls apart. But what's interesting is that their relationship is sort of saved by his sickness. He gets very, very ill. And to sort of continue this process, we find out that she is poisoning him.
This is
She's
Munchausen's, basically.
Yeah, it's Munchausen by proxy. So that she can sort of reduce him to an infantile level. They can bond, because there's also a very bizarre relationship between our main character and his mother. We'll get into that later.
Of course.
And then apparently, as the movie ends, they have a happy domestic life and his creative work suffers. So big picture, I think that there's sort of fascinating three distinct female motifs. There is Alma, right, who has a romantic relationship with Reynolds, obviously a very dysfunctional one. There's Cyril, his sister, who has sort of a business yet still feminine relationship. And then also his mother, who both teaches him how to sew, teaches him how to create, and then after she dies, sort of recurrently appears in his dreams, talking to him. So those are the three primary female archetypes, but I'll throw it to you, Gio.
No, that's great. That's a great setup, because you have a very powerful feminine influence in all three of them. It's very similar to what me and a friend, I don't know if I could still mention his name because he got into a bit of trouble recently. We were talking about the films of Vincent Gallo, and no, sorry, I was talking about it with him, but I was also talking about it with my friend Kino Corner, his theory on Vincent Gallo's The Brown Bunny, how each female he encounters is a Jungian archetypal mother, maiden, crone iteration of Chloe Sevigny's character, if you've ever watched The Brown Bunny. It's very similar here. There is a maiden, mother, crone distinction that the feminine serves as the unconscious shadow self, the anima of Reynolds. So this is I believe, the 1950s. This is when fashion was starting to change, and where you had like a lot of very high key designers that were doing a lot of private commissions for very rich and famous people, very rich and powerful women, such as this one. I think the one he designs a wedding dress for is the Princess of Belgium or something like that.
Yeah, I think it's the Belgian princess.
Yeah, I
Well, and
think
what's
there's
interesting enough, isn't it implied, because it's never directly stated, but Alma is not British. It's
she's
at least
German or
implied that she
something, or
is. Oh,
Belgian.
I thought it was she could have been Belgian, but
Yes, yeah. I think so.
because she has sort of a French accent. I guess I don't know. Anyway, I don't know anything about Europe. Sorry.
Well, he initially is drawn to her because the actual actress, what's her name, Kremps, who I believe was in a lot of other Paul Thomas Anderson films, because a lot of directors, they'll recycle different actors and actresses. I mean, well, I mean, of course, you know, There Will Be Blood, right? That was Paul Thomas Anderson, right?
Oh shoot, I should know this. I don't know anything about film.
I believe that was also PTA. Yeah. Uh, with with um with Daniel Day Lewis, right? So Daniel Day Lewis, he's playing this fashion
Yes, it
designer.
was. It was PTA.
Yeah. So Daniel Day Lewis, he's this old school fashion designer. Of course, fashion is changing to more mainstream brands that are accessible. There is this sort of leveling of high fashion where people that are in the petit bourgeoisie or in like the sort of upper middle classes can afford different dresses by designers. Nowadays, we know this. I mean, you have to be like very, very rich and famous to have a personal designer nowadays, right? So this is still where fashion was this area of making serviceable dresses for special events. It wasn't exactly the runway fashion that's very highly adjacent to the art world. And so you have this designer who's sort of a dinosaur and he's on his way out. And it's implied that a lot of his clients are going to more of these affordable mainstream fashion designer houses, or that are rather factories, like Jean Paul Gaultier, for example. And you have the house designer with the name. He lives in this mansion that's, of course, paid for by a very successful patron, old woman that he tries to make look beautiful. And he has an army of seamstresses, and I know this because my great grandmother was actually in was a seamstress and all that. So he has an army of seamstresses that hand make everything, and he personally sews the label of the house behind the dress, the Woodcock House. And as it progresses through the film, he's at his wits' end with his one muse. Then he discovers the what's her name in the film, the Kremps woman.
Her name is Alma.
Oh yeah, Oma. So then Oma has these broad shoulders, is tall, is skinny, basically perfect runway model fashion designer, like fashionista, right? But she's working in this restaurant where she's a waitress, and immediately, like literally from their first encounter, she goes right to infantilizing him in a weird way. And she she he orders this huge meal, and she writes him a note of her phone number and address saying, for the hungry boy, right? So you know what this is going to be about, even though he's way older than her. So then as the film goes on, she works in the house. I believe she has some connection to being a seamstress and all that. And you have to realize that when you are someone who is an artist, those like little moments of creativity, they can come few and far between. And when ordinary life disrupts them, this is what I found so fascinating about the film, is that Daniel Day-Lewis played a very good creative, in the sense that he's very petty and cantankerous, and he needs a silence, and he needs that sort of on the one end a very reassuring and structured home life, but not one that can disrupt his flow. And so this translates to him being very like crotchety and insulting and petty. And it reminds me of something I heard from a documentary on the famous comic artist Mobius. You know Mobius, right, Jay?
Yes.
He also this is he got famous because I believe, was it Marvel that brought him on to do a Batman or a Superman? Sorry, a Spider-Man. Was it Marvel or DC that does Spider-Man? I forget. Um, which I thought was very interesting. But Mobius is very famous in his own right for his own series, and like really one of the best avant-garde comic book artists ever. Right? His penmanship is incredible. There's this documentary that was made a few years before he died, talking about his relationship to his wife in one section where he said that, it's very funny because a lot of comic artists, a lot of artists in general, it's almost like the wife becomes this mother figure where they're doing the taxes, they're organizing the meetings because the artist can like have time to play with his little colors and his pens. It's very much like a sort of consuming mother type of relationship, right?
Oh, and that's
Because
exactly the
yeah,
archetype I wanted to bring up, right? The
yeah,
all-consuming mother, because she does become that, right? She is
yes,
literally later in the film poisoning him, almost kills him,
yeah.
right? To keep him hers, right? To keep him attached to her.
Yeah. Yeah. And so they have this like very strained relationship. And notice how one thing I'll say, skipping ahead of the film, she has this vision of having a child with him and living a very like, bougie type of existence. But throughout the film, there's not a lot of physical contact between them. There's not a lot of implications of sex or anything like that. It very much is a standoffish muse type of relationship where to lower it to the level of being fleshy and visceral and vulgar, that would have a profound impact on the relationship as a whole. So Woodcock wants to keep her at a distance. But when it comes to sort of like the more masculinized version of the feminine in the film, it's obviously his sister. His sister is his business partner. She's the one organizing all of these very high end commissions with like royalty and famous people and so on and so forth. She's the one that he confides in as I believe she's the older sister. And so she took the role of her mother in nurturing his talent, but doing it in a very strict and regimental way. Whereas Olma's character is sort of the chaotic feminine. She's the agent of disorder because she has a lot of other needs that are not there as a sister, right? So they have kind of like, I wouldn't want to say that the two like Woodcock siblings. I don't want to say that there's an incestuous relationship there. It's more of like she is the manager. She takes on a masculine role, whereas he's dwelling in something that is very feminine, which is the act of creativity in a very, which has historically been a very feminine pursuit. Although a lot of the greatest fashion designers of history have been men, and not necessarily gay men either. I mean, a lot of them were straight, right? I know, like there's this one very famous model who wrote about actually the relationship between homosexual men and women in the fashion world. That's in the 50s is very red pilling. But anyways, so a lot of the great designers were men, and so but they're taking on the embodiment of what has been pigeonholed as a characteristically feminine form of art, right? Although it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be. So he's going into this relationship with his own creativity. He's meeting this new woman, and then all of a sudden there is this disequilibrium he finds with her in the house, with Ulma in the house. And there's this one scene where he's confiding in his sister after he's trying to create a dress for this very rich but very old woman. He's having a hard time, of all the different seams and everything. And he confides to his sister, I can't have her in the house. I can't work. I can't do anything. She's ruining my life. Like typical, like he's an old man, but it's like a teen angst type of thing, right? Like, and of course, what happens, the stereotypical movie thing, she walks in the room mid rant, and now she knows what he really feels about her. And so what does she do? She goes and scavenges for mushrooms in the forest, finds the poisonous ones, and then feeds it to him, and he's like terribly sick. And now she goes from the intoxicating, chaotic maiden to the feminine, motherly figure. nursing him to health. Because what happens, he's trying to model for this wedding dress for this princess, and wedding dresses are very important in this film. We'll get to that, Jay. So he's trying to model for he's trying to construct this wedding dress. He only has a day left to send it off to Belgium. What happens? He collapses right on it, ruins the dress. And so his seamstresses and his sister and his now girlfriend has to work the whole night to repair this dress. And well, sorry, they work the whole night. And while Uma is nursing him like a mother nursing a sick child, very, very similar to an Edvard Munch painting. That's the first thing that came to mind. Nursing him back to health. And he's terribly still, like, he's delusional and crotchety and cantankerous, and he tells the doctor to go F himself. And it's this, in a weird way, it's very crazy and insane, but it's also beautiful. It's a very like I wouldn't want to say like it's like a femcel fantasy or whatever, but there very much is like a very strong feminine fantasy of I can fix this genius who is a creative genius, but he's like a lion, he's like a blonde beast, he plays by his own rules, and he's this almost like a Heathcliff character. He's a force of nature, right? But I'm going to tame him and I'm going to break him down and nurse him back up. And so there's this very powerful feminine fantasy of engaging with a male artist of any stripe. And so in a lot of ways, it's a very beautiful film, but it's a very destructive film. And then eventually he gets better. And that's when she's telling, I believe she's saying all of this in the film. It's interspliced with her monologuing to a therapist or another guy or whatever. And it's a very beautiful thing where she's like, he's his most calm, he's his most loving, he's his most serene when he's on this, like, basically the cusp of death. And so the relationship between the feminine and death is very powerful in this film because, of course, his mother dies when he's young. His mother she had this beautiful wedding dress. And there's this one piece of dialogue between them where he's saying that, it's very hard to do wedding dresses because a lot of models have a lot of superstitions around wearing wedding dresses, where they say that if a model wears a wedding dress on a runway, that they're never going to get married, or they're going to marry the wrong guy, or it's going to characterize their life and their romantic relationship in some way. And so he goes, it's very like notoriously difficult to do a good wedding dress, right? But he's obsessed with the same design of his mother's wedding dress that then gets lost through time or moving or whatever. And now in the film, he models this wedding dress off of Uma's character. He has this very rare I think it was Italian lace that survived through the war. This is the 1950s, right? So he's talking about World War II. And he like throws it on her carelessly. He's putting needles and pins everywhere. And he's sort of like trying to like mold her in a way, but she resists that. Out of all of the muses he's had that he's burned through, like light bulbs, you put one in, you replace them, right? She's the only one that had this sort of chthonic feminine power to resist his imposing masculine creativity. And how does she do it? She literally physically breaks him down to the level of a child in his sickness to do this. And she does this repeatedly. And near the end of the film, it's implied that he's fine with it. He takes the mushroom, he knows he's getting poisoned, but he does it anyways. And it's a very like weird relationship, but within the confines of that very creative lifestyle, you can understand in a weird way. And so I thought it was a very beautiful film. And it really has that, the interplay between the masculine and the feminine within a creative endeavor. And she then has this vision of having a child with him. And it is implied that they eventually do have sex. And she like totally just like breaks him down and builds him back up. And it's a way in which the feminine can impose upon this feral, chaotic force of nature that is male creativity in the artist. And if you look throughout a lot of human history, a lot of artists had this relationship. And even when there wasn't, like if you have artists such as I mentioned, Edvard Munch or Toulouse-Lautrec, where they have a very like chaotic and destructive relationship to women, and they're like, frequenting ladies of the night and all this stuff, there still is a uh um there was something that Robert Hughes, the great art critic, said about Edvard Munch. He said, to Edvard Munch, sex is ominous and hateful. As a man, you either live in the humiliation of celibacy, being an incel, or you subject yourself to the castration of the feminine. And it was like this very the polarity of the masculine energy being subsumed by the feminine. And of course, Edvard Munch was into the early Scandinavian vitalist movement, where it's like a bunch of men, bathing naked in the sun, very soul bra-ish type of stuff, but that they were doing, where they were like the male. If you look at the male bather painters, if you look at the male bathing paintings of Edvard Munch, you know what I mean, where they had this like Germanic and Scandinavian health movement where a lot of men would prance naked on the beach in these like nudist beaches, and they do their exercises in the nude. And it was about this like solar vitality type of stuff, very, very like not feminine, but at the same time, Edvard Munch had this incredible relationship to the feminine that, yes, was very, I guess, the modern, 2010s lingo would be toxic and chaotic and whatnot. But here you see with Woodcock in the film an equally destructive and toxic, but yet beautiful and in some ways endearing relationship to the feminine. And so, yeah, that's my little rant on the film. So, yeah.
So, what do you make of because their relationship sort of has two distinct crises, right? There's
Right.
the first one which punctuates in her poisoning him first, and then they get married,
Yeah.
and pretty quickly the relationship goes sour, and it sort of culminates on New Year's,
Yes.
where she gets invited out by to go dancing with this doctor. She ends up going to this like horrible, like gaudy, New Year's celebration, and he comes to get her. He
Yeah.
sort of rebukes her, which I think is an interesting element there. Multiple things. One, obviously, the reaction of the kind of the aesthetic or the artist to kind of like mass market celebration is just
Yeah. It was also very
disgust.
Americanized as well. There was a lot of American themes in this New Year's party. Yeah.
Right, but I think it's interesting as well, right? The element of she acts out to force him to correct her.
Yeah.
She's almost kind of giving him some giant test to be like, no, I want you to come and get me. No, legitimately, like that's what's happening.
It's a shit
right?
test. Yeah, it's 100%.
Yeah, no, it is.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very like Patrice O'Neill-esque, like when he talked about like, Patrice O'Neill, for being like this, a fellow fat guy, he had a very, attractive wife that he, would talk about, she'd be like, you give her a little, but they keep taking. You got to stop it. You say, no, you got to stop. Like you remember those classic Patrice O'Neill interviews, right?
Yeah.
Now, not that I endorse, I'm not about the whole like anti-woman stuff, but like, there is obviously like a lot of truth there. There's obviously a lot of truth there. Like she's goading him and testing him. And it's just a simple fact of human nature. You know what I mean? Between men and women. And there's this sort of like, and it's very funny how there's a little subtle hints of the changing times, because this is in Europe, but there's like this very like American-esque and gaudy New Year's party. And so there's sort of like a commentary on the vulgarity of the culture that is coming down the pipe in this time after the war. And he's sort of trying to find a way in this new culture, this new mass-produced culture, as a niche boutique fashion designer. And so, yeah, then it's also worth noting, by the way, that for years he resisted, I believe Daniel Day-Lewis is like, he's supposed to be in his 50s in this film. For years, he resisted actually getting married because he assumed that if he was going to be married, then he would view every wedding dress he made filtered through his own relationship to his wife. And so the fact that he was broken down to submit to bourgeois domesticated marriage is that's a very important plot point, that they would get married. and that he essentially he does pass the test because he grabs her and wrestles her away from this terrible New Year's party of gallantry and drunken festivity. And so, well, what did you think of that part, Burden? You mentioned about the shit testing. What did you think
Yeah,
about it?
it's really well shot. Like it's a visually interesting movie, and I think it's interesting because we see this sort of social tension
Yeah,
throughout the movie, where we see both a social tension between our character Reynolds and those around him, because as you've said, the times are sort of changing, and he has this sort of uncomfortable relationship with this older, unattractive woman who is sort of nouveau riche, right?
right.
Very, very wealthy, but very, very classless.
Yes.
And he has made, I think, like an absurd number of wedding dresses for her over and over and over again,
Yeah.
because he can sort of summon the magic to make her young and beautiful again.
And
And
as an artist, you grate your teeth because she's paying you. So
well, she's paying, and also, you know, he feels as if he is lowering himself because
yeah,
she is not only physically unattractive, so he is sort of contorting his craft to meet this unworthy vessel, but also he is forced to finally, after resisting over and over again, attend her wedding. He never wanted to go, and
yeah,
he goes with Alma, and part of the reason why it's never explicitly stated is he doesn't want to see her embarrassing herself in his dress.
yeah.
And there's this moment at the wedding, and I think that there is a tension between the two party, so I guess three technically party scenes between the beginning and the end. Because in this one, they together, he and Alma, are
Yeah.
unified in going to retrieve his dress. This woman
And
has gotten
protecting his art.
horribly
Yeah.
right. This woman has gotten horribly drunk, embarrassed herself at her own wedding. And he basically says, like, we're going in to get the dress right now. I don't care. Like, we're
Yeah.
going to save my art from this. And, he kind of torpedoes that relationship. And so that is one way in which social class plays into this. But also later, kind of in between the first and second poisonings, when they are married now, we see this tension where, he is sort of rankling at the relationship. He's not happy. He feels as if he's been sort of, tricked into something.
He
And
tells her that you maybe you have no taste at all. In that Daniel Day-Lewis type of voice. That was like really, that was so cutting. Maybe you have no
and
taste at all.
there's a moment, and I'm not entirely sure of the social connotation of this, just because I'm not really up on mid 20th century European like party game practice, but there's sort of this setup where it looks like it's kind of like a speed dating setup, and they're playing, I think, backgammon or something.
Yeah.
So basically it's round robin, you move from one to the other. And so we have back to back, a conversation between him and his wife, which is very icy. And then him and this other woman, one of his clients. And it seems as if she is sort of this other woman trying to
Muscle in.
steal him away from her, maybe, who knows. But very clearly there is this class dynamic where she views Alma as being lower or underclass. And that comes back around when we talk about this sort of wild bacchanalian celebration, because we see the doctor who she's not quite, it's never implied they're having an affair, but she is flirting with, and
she has eyes with him. She has eyes with him.
Yes. That again, right, we see a lowering where that same sort of process of like massification or social leveling that has occurred in the fashion world is occurring here, because it is not only just kind of the average hoi polloi, but it is this doctor, right? Some of his high class friends are now descending like to that level. And so when he comes to get her, it's this really striking scene. And there's a certain element of this, which is the shit test, right? Like, no, I won't let you do this. But on another level, I think as well, it is like, no, I will, like, you are not allowed to, like, you are a representation of me and you will conduct yourself as such, which I think is interesting, because that is another dynamic as well, the degree to which the product of their work is both of them. It is her wearing his art. And I think that that's an interesting development as well, that they it goes from being this kind of revolving cast of him and whichever muse to his one muse, right? The person
Right.
he is linked to. And I think that that's an interesting development as well, because before they're both going to retrieve his art.
Yeah.
Whereas here he's basically saying like, no, you are a part of me and you are not allowed to do that. I don't know. Do you see what I'm getting at there, Gio?
Well, no, it was a great scene because like they matched each other's freak in that moment, you know? Like they like that was a great moment because now she fully is invested in each other as an entity, even though he is the creative. Um I remember one time, I don't know if I should say this. I probably shouldn't say this to quote the famous Geoism. I probably shouldn't say this. But there was this the guy, to be fair though, the writer, he's a good guy and I might interview him one day. But there was this a magazine once that wrote about my artwork in relation to my friends Fen and Matthew the Stout. And he said something, it was like it wasn't meant as like maybe it was meant as a jab, but he said that like a lot of my landscapes are sort of like in the British context, are sort of like a seasider art, you know, at these like seaside resorts in the UK, and like they have landscape painters, plein air painters there, right? And I didn't, you know, I don't really take any offense to it because I do quite a bit of plein air landscape painting, and you know, I mean, if they're pleasant or whatever. But I remember my girlfriend read this and she freaked. She like absolutely, she's like, this is terrible. I can't believe that he would say such a thing about you. And I'm like, oh my God. Like I wasn't even that offended. You know what I mean? But so I totally got that moment. That was a great moment in the film, right? But I think that in terms of a greater socio-political context or a greater cultural context, the one woman that is a client of his was chastising his wife because of course she's not British. But then of course, you know, the whole bacchanalia of the New Year's festival is this like American theme. I believe they even had the Confederate flag in Abraham Lincoln in this on stilts type of deal, you know, which to the British ruling class at the time was very like vulgar and new world and not very couth, right? But when it comes to the enclosing of that social system, the sort of like British higher class. I mean, obviously, you know, they won the war against the Germans, but did they really win the war against America? You know what I mean? Like, you know, the Americans basically ruled the world after that point, you know, because of, well, we all know what happened, right? So I thought like Paul Thomas Anderson, in a very slight, minuscule way, was nodding to I would say, a more mature aspect of that greater sociocultural commentary than this recent abomination that he did with the Thomas Pynchon short story. What's it called? One soy after another, one battle after another, one battle after another. The recent Paul Thomas Anderson film, but in that film, it's a very good commentary on the situation in a weird way, right? Like these people, they still maintain their class distinction, their class consciousness, but that class consciousness has suffered a great deal of you know, a great blow to their sort of global legitimacy, right? And so it comes off as kind of pernicious to make that comment that, well, you know, she's not British. I don't know what they do in her with her people in Belgium or Germany or wherever Uma's from. And it's a very like, you know, these people are kind of on the losing end of things. The way that Woodcock himself is on the losing end of a larger, more mass produced, more American driven fashion industry that now is coming from New York rather than coming from London or Paris. So it's sort of like the art world in general, that huge change after the war from Paris and, you know, from Paris, Italy, the UK, especially from Paris to New York City. It's the same trend over and over again at this time. And but that's like, you know, that was like an aside of the film. When it comes to the relationship between them, like as you pointed out, there is always she's trying to wrestle him away from what did make him a great. In it's not necessarily that she wants to destroy his creativity. She wants to domesticate him. It's just like that is a an element of nature that in a lot of ways is necessary. Because it is true what people say, like, you know, a lot of people, men and women that are sort of bachelors or whatever later on in life. They're sort of cement. I know a lot of older men like this, by the way, who never got married or whatever. They're cemented in their ways, and they can become quite quite ornery in their disposition towards anything that smacks of like bourgeois domesticity. And so it's a very interesting tension there, right? Uh, and throughout the film, the fact that a lot of those tender moments comes at the behest of a great physical illness, and it's very cathartic in a way. And but anyways, I've rambled for far too long. Yeah.
Oh no, not at all, man. What would you make of, and this is not a reading that I think is super supported by the text, but just one I was sort of throwing around with some friends. What do you think about the reading that this is a narrative exclusively filtered through Alma talking to a third party, and she
Mhm.
is trying to romanticize her role in this?
That's a good interpretation. I mean, ostensibly it is about that because throughout, like I said, throughout the film, it's spliced with these narratives where she's spieling to this therapist or this other male figure about her relationship, and she's by a fireside, and she's gussing up a lot of these details, and she is creating this like very powerful psychodrama in her head, and it is very like through her gaze in a weird way, the film. But what did you think of that though? Do you like what would your interpretation be?
Well,
Because
I think
I
that
think
there's
that
a
is a correct interpretation. Yeah.
yeah. Well, I think that that's an interesting thing that there's a, and I hate the term unreliable narrator because it's most often used in a very Reddit context. But I
Right.
think
Right.
that there is a a dissonance between what actually happened in the film, like not what we're shown, but what the events as they were actually supposed to have happened, and what we are seeing, because she is interpreting everything in a highly romanticized, idealized version where her actions are redeemed after the fact. So for instance, like the scene where he voluntarily takes the unpoison or the poison
Okay.
again, where it's like, okay, well, did that really happen? Or is that her romanticizing this sort of Munchausen by proxy, right? Saying
Right.
that, oh, he really wants this, which again, that sort of infantilization we see from the very beginning throughout the end. I don't think that's a necessary reading, but I think that that's an interesting element to it.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah. I wonder though. There is that element of like with when it comes to Munchausen's by proxy. There's an element of like Darvo or gaslighting where you convince yourself that you're doing this because you love this person, because they need it, and because ultimately their life would be better for it than not. But you're still poisoning somebody. You're still like horrendously affecting their life. So, not to, but then again, I think that you can't really pull a sort of how shall I say it? Sometimes it's necessary to suspend a sort of real world moralism when it comes to a lot of these films, when it comes to any
Of
work of
course.
art. So I wouldn't be too critical or too judging, but given the real world context of the things like this happens every single day, then yes, it is very like destructive and abusive. But it's a very feminine style of abuse, though, right? It's mothering to the point of destruction, and that is, I think, something that isn't. There's a lot of famous cases, of course, in the real world. Like there's the whole Gypsy Rose thing, right? Uh, but it's something that a lot of people talk about, and I think Paul Thomas Anderson, he's very for as much as like his recent work is terrible, he is willing to go to places that are very like politically incorrect, but portraying them in a sympathetic way, like specifically in Magnolia with Tom Cruise's character, right? So I think even though like nowadays we view it as well, it's Hollywood, and this recent film that came out is like Bryce Dallas has had that great line about liberal mustiness. I think if you suspend any moral judgment, that does make sense within the film. So yeah.
Well, and actually, that's an element to it. I feel like it is. I was surprised to see a movie from this era deal with negative femininity so honestly.
Mhm.
Uh, because a worse director could have very easily turned this into sort of a modern liberal morality play where
Yeah.
she was actually completely morally justified all along. The sort of like bromides you'd sort of expect from, woke quote unquote Hollywood. But
Mhm.
yeah, no, he's sort of it's not entirely negative, right? Their relationship isn't entirely negative, but I do
Right.
think it is interesting that he is very comfortable painting her in a negative light. And
Right.
I think it's interesting that there are multiple negative versions of femininity, right? We
Mhm.
see the kind of, vanity of, an aging woman in his, one of his clients, this sort of like backbiting cattiness, in the woman that he, speaks at the kind of like backgammon game.
Yeah.
Uh, but there's sort of a number. And honestly, there are very few male characters in this book other than Reynolds.
Right.
Uh, but
And the doctor, that's
you
pretty much it.
yeah. I mean, what do you make of, his relationship to his mother? Like his mother, while he is
Right.
poisoned, deeply ill, his mother sort of appears to him.
Yeah.
And then when Alma walks into the room, she disappears. Right? I think
Right.
obviously there's a level of replacement there. She is
Yes.
becoming his mother, both on a literal level as well as kind of like a spiritual one. But what do you
Right.
make of that scene?
That was another great scene that was very telling because I was thinking about this when we took a pause. I was thinking about this again, very similar to a lot of paintings by Edvard Munch, where if you look at his lithographs or his paintings, such as The Sick Child, he was very sickly as a kid, and he was consumed by these feminine forces, either through nurses or through his mother. And so I think that the film is very honest when it comes to sort of female power struggles and intersexual competition. And the model I was thinking of was Coco Chanel, who wrote this like very telling screed about gay men in the fashion industry and how they like, make women look ridiculous. And there was always this like tension between, gay men and women. And I remember one time on DA, me and Prude, we had Catherine D on, and Catherine, she was recently in the New York Times. I don't know if you saw that, Jay. Um, but we were reviewing these three films, and one of them was this film called Pig Hag about this rather large woman and her only friends are these gay men. And at the very end of the film, she says, "My gays have ruined me. My gays have ruined me." But anyways, that's off topic. It was very well, kind of on topic, but it's on topic in the sense that when it comes to Woodcock in the film, just by necessity, he is surrounded by the world of the feminine. His seamstresses are all women, his sister, his mother who died, Uma, the clients that he has are women, they're very powerful women that employ him. So he has to assert himself as a man in a very different way than men in relation to other men. That's why he becomes very standoffish and catty and cantankerous. And so it's a matter of him navigating the world of the feminine because of the loss of that very maternal feminine influence early on in life. And he's always at the one end trying to find, and I know this is like stereotypical, especially of male artists, trying to like go back to mommy, trying to like find a motherly maternal replacement. But he's also repulsed by it because he has to differentiate himself as a man in the world of women, which is, I hate to say it, a very unhealthy type of thing, right? Especially if you're a heterosexual man. Um,
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely you've surmised it well there.
right.
I'm unfortunately, Gio, going to have to step out soon just due to real world concerns. But just
Oh,
to kind of put a
sorry.
bow on it, this was a really interesting movie. Uh, one that I was not particularly excited to watch because I'll be 100% honest. This was a date night movie for me. And so I
Oh
was like,
yeah.
oh, come on, a movie about a male dress designer. Like that sounds awful. But it was really interesting. There's a lot to be said about, the relationship between the sexes, the kind of different forms that femininity takes. And I did give my wife credit. She picked a good movie. So fair
Yeah.
enough. But would recommend it. You can find it, rent it for $3 or sail the high seas. But there's an interesting commentary there on both the nature of what it is to be a creative, what it is to produce art that indexes with the real world and becomes commercialized, and also with the feminine, in both
Right.
positive and negative in kind of multiple different forms.
Which is literally the mother
There's
of creation, the feminine. Yeah.
right, yeah.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, man, I think it was a really interesting film. I appreciate you coming on to review it with me. But Gio, if people want to find more of you, where should they look?
Well, I'm sure my link tree will have everything, like from my YouTube channel, Jenner Productions, Twitter at Gen Geo, Substack, Geo's Content Corner, Telegram. I need to get more Telegram subscribers. Unfortunately, I don't know. Telegram's weird, but yeah, Patreon.com/Jenner Productions, Telegram. Sorry, Substack.com/Geo's Content Corner. Every episode of Content Minded is only $5 a month, although there's different tiers on Patreon. But I'm also starting to get more into art videos and where I talk and I paint. I call it Painting Discourse every Monday. And in the near future, I'm going to probably start releasing Patreon exclusive art videos as well. So, but yeah, I have literally hours upon hours of content, and of course, I have DA with Prudentialist Digital Archipelago every Tuesday night, and so yeah, that's just go to my link tree. That's probably the best bet. So.
Well, sure thing, man. I appreciate it. As far as my stuff, Jay Burden Show, Apple, Spotify, YouTube, anywhere you will listen to podcasts. You want to support me? Patreon, Substack, or Gumroad. Get the episodes early and ad-free. Again, Gio, I really appreciate it, man. And everyone,
Yeah, God
keep your head
bless.
up.
Yeah, it's great.